Hi everyone, I'm Rose Martin, and we are right around the corner in Kinston, North Carolina with one of the, I don't know, if you think about it, what is one of your favorite shows on PBS? Would it be A Chef's Life? Well, that's where we are. We're here chatting with Vivian Howard. We're going to chat about her book, Deep Run Roots, and we'll chat about the show. So, Vivian, thanks so much for inviting us right here to Kinston.
Thank you, thank you.
So tell me about the space we're in, this kitchen.
So this is my office. We call it VHQ, Vivian Howard Headquarters, I guess.
Okay.
And it was originally a tire warehouse, but my mother-in-law bought it maybe 7 years ago and redid it and made it her home. And she decided she didn't want to live here, so I bought it from her.
Well, and of course, a Vivian Howard office would have to have a kitchen.
Yes, this is the test kitchen where I tested all the recipes for the book, and I'm working on a new book here, and this is just, it's 2 blocks from the restaurant, so it's really convenient.
So let's go back to a young Vivian. She's
What do you mean back?
Yeah, back, right, absolutely. Well, we'll just go to maybe a 3-4-year-old Vivian. Were you always fascinated with the kitchen?
No, I did not grow up in a house where cooking was something that was celebrated. Eating certainly was. But my grandmothers both were accomplished cooks, but my mom, it was never really her thing. And I always saw cooking kind of as a burden, maybe because mom saw it that way. But I definitely grew up in a family where eating was an obsession.
I know you. I get that. I get that too, right? So growing up and enjoying food, how did you actually end up with such a wonderful career around food?
Well, when I was in college, I studied abroad in Argentina, and that was the first time that I really saw like culture and food as something that's really tied together. And I'd say that was the beginning of all of this. And then after college, I moved to New York. I worked in advertising. I always wanted to be a writer. And so I quit my job in advertising and I started working as a server in a restaurant to kind of like find my way in the journalism world. And I decided that I wanted to work in the kitchen as a means to maybe translate that experience into a career as a food writer. So that's how it all kind of happened.
But it was in New York because you wanted to leave your small town and spread your wings and see what the world had to offer for you. And it took you where?
I left home when I was 14 and went to boarding school. Went to an all-girls Moravian boarding school. And then after high school, I went to NC State and then New York.
So when you were in boarding school, did you try to hide your Southern background, try to have people not think that you were from the South, try to do something a little different?
Well, the boarding school was actually in the South, but I didn't want people to know that I came from like a redneck farm.
Okay.
So I kind of, I'd say, I didn't alter my story, but I didn't share the details.
Well, and from growing up in the North, like I did, there's certain things that you can just pick up on the Southern charm, but the Southern language, sometimes you say things that are a little different, or you might use a phrase that some people aren't really familiar with. Did you run into any of those kinds of things when you were either in boarding school or heading to New York?
Yeah, well, I realized really quickly when I got to boarding school that my parents and folks in my community didn't necessarily speak like everyone else. We had a lot of colloquialisms like over yonder or I'm gonna carry you. And so I became really hyper aware of that. And particularly in New York, you know, I didn't want people to know that I was from the South.
Right.
And so I altered my accent in such a way that I thought that I sounded like a Northerner, but I had people all the time ask me if I was from Australia.
Oh, really? See, you were actress right then.
I was doing something.
So you were looking to be a writer at first. Who influenced you early on that you thought, you know, I love books, I think I might want to write?
Well, as a kid, I always wrote stories to get attention or to get out of trouble. I know that sounds strange, but if something were not going my way at home, I'd go in my room and write my account of it. And then I'd come in and throw my little story on the kitchen table and march out, and the story would make my family laugh.
Oh, I'd have to hear one of those. Do you remember one in particular?
Well, I wrote a story when I was in fourth grade called Santa's Private Detectives, and it was about your shoes. And at night, when you took your shoes off, they walked to the North Pole and told Santa how you were that day. And sometimes, you know, when you woke up in the morning and you couldn't find your shoes, it was because they hadn't made it back just in time to get in their right spot. There were a lot more details to it, but I feel like it was the precursor to the Elf on the Shelf.
Right.
And I could have been a millionaire right now.
Yeah, you could have been. How clever. But that's really clever. So you were writing early on, entertaining your family, but a way to kind of express the things that you either weren't happy about or that you wanted to make your point. Right?
Yes, yes. And, you know, I think we do things that people praise us for, and I always got a lot of positive feedback for my writing, and so I felt like that's what I was supposed to do.
Were your parents writers?
No, my dad is a tobacco farmer, was a tobacco farmer. My mom was a first grade teacher. But I would say that my dad is a storyteller.
You know, so many Southern stories get carried that way, you know, where that's why they're keeping them alive. They're actually passing them down from generation to generation. Do you remember any of the stories your dad used to tell you, or have you told those stories again to your kids?
Well, my parents live across the road from me now, and so my dad comes over every morning before school. So he has the opportunity to tell those stories himself. And really, his stories are more like one-liners that are loaded.
Great sense of humor.
Yes, he has a great sense of humor. And he is a person who's always struggled with his weight. And so one of the things, I interviewed him recently because I'm writing about that. And one of his one-liners is, if you ain't losing, you're gaining.
Okay.
So there's nothing in between. There's nothing in between. He's always either been on a binge or a diet.
Have you altered some of your recipes at Good Southern Cooking to help him with some of that?
Yeah, you know, he basically tries not to eat many carbohydrates or, you know, anything white, he says. So I cook for them a lot, and if I make spaghetti for my family, I'll make this sauce and then roast a head of broccoli and spoon the spaghetti sauce over it for him. So just like little substitutions and things that I switch out.
What a wonderful daughter. Yeah, wonderful daughter, because then
tell
we know
him
it's going to taste good. So a lot of times families have food traditions. Did you grow up with any type of food traditions, a Sunday afternoon meal or anything that you've carried on with your family?
Definitely. You know, we always had a big lunch after church on Sunday, and my father had a relationship with a man in our community. His name was Tom Heath, and I think that Tom must have owed my dad money, and instead of paying him money, every Saturday morning Tom Heath would bring 3 barbecue chickens over to our house, and these were chickens that were barbecued in the style of Eastern North Carolina style vinegar-based barbecue. And so they were like smoky and vinegary and slow cooked and just fantastic. And my bedroom is adjacent to the kitchen. And so I would wake up on Saturday morning with this smell of barbecue chicken. And so that's the food memory tradition that I remember the most vividly. The other one is something that we still do, is we have sausage biscuits on Christmas morning.
Oh.
So my dad gets up at like 4 a.m. and grills sausage, link sausage, air-dried link sausage. And we have biscuits with muscadine, grape preserves, mustard, and of course sausage.
I know I've read that your chicken and rice is your mom's recipe, and that's kind of your comfort food, your go-to dish?
Yes. I mentioned that cooking was kind of a burden for her. She has rheumatoid arthritis and has had it since she was 17. And so chicken and rice was the thing that she made at least once a week, and it was our comfort food. It's something that I cook for my children. It's something my sisters all cook for their families.
So it's become a favorite?
Yes.
All right, so let's talk about favorites. So if I was to say favorite spice, what would it be?
Well, my favorite spice that I currently use too much of is cumin, but I would say Eastern North Carolina's only spice is black pepper.
Only spice, black pepper.
Yes, and actually, it used to be a sign of how much money you had, how much black pepper you used.
So it wasn't to cover up the flavor of the food.
No, it was spices were hard to get, and so the more black pepper you used, the more affluent you were.
All right, favorite vegetable?
Tomatoes.
And I read about your tomato sandwich that you developed. That sounds delicious.
It is, and we're getting close to tomato season, so I'm hankering for them.
How about favorite thing to do when you're not working?
Garden. I'm a big, I guess gardening's not really the right term. I have a lot of house plants. I would call the inside of my house kind of jungle-ish. And so I love plants and like plants around my yard, but not necessarily a garden. I'm talking about perennials and flowers, I guess.
Which are beautiful. I read that you don't really compare people to food, except in the case of your grandma with the sweet potatoes. Tell me that story.
So my Grandma Hill was never very warm and fuzzy or not over the top in any way.
Not a cuddle grandma.
No. She never made me feel special or anything like that. But I knew that she loved me. She just kind of, was no nonsense, and she made these candied yams, which it's not really even fair to call them candied yams when you compare them to all the other candied yams in the world. When you think about candied yams, you think about like marshmallow and brown sugar and cinnamon and honey and
burying the yam.
Right. But Grandma's had just maybe like a sprinkle of brown sugar and a little bit of cinnamon, and that was it. And so that's how I kind of think about her. If you think about the stereotypical grandma, like cuddly, warm,
over the top,
marshmallow, brown sugar, and then there's Grandma Hill.
You've got a great story about pecans also, and that's a favorite of yours. And traditional South, or just your favorite nut, and you try to incorporate it in what you do?
Well, pecans are kind of our nut here. It's like if you go to Hawaii, everybody's shoving macadamia nuts at you, and here in Eastern North Carolina, it's pecans. And my mom grew up with a yard full of pecan trees, and they were a really frugal family. And so when the pecans would fall from the trees in the morning, my grandmother, Grandma Hill, would get her children up and make them go out in the road and pick up all the pecans before trucks would come by and crush them. And that was then she would sell the pecans, and that money was their Christmas money.
Now you put a recipe in your book, and you talk about which it surprised me because I had never tasted moonshine until one of my neighbors gave it to me, and I saw you put in here apple pie moonshine, and I'm like, you know what? That's perfect. It fits right in with the local flavor. And I think one of the things I love so much about your show is the way you'll kind of take it by an ingredient, or even in your book, you kind of, and this is a big book, but you took it by an ingredient to where anyone at home watching, anyone who's going to a farmer's market or in a store can, grab a sweet potato, grab some blueberries when they're in season, and create something that's delicious. How did that concept come about?
I know that I'll go to the farmer's market or the grocery store and buy something that is beautiful, whether I know what I'm going to do with it or not. And I know that a lot of people do the same, or get a CSA box and they've got, a bunch of turnips, and they're like, what in the world do I do with these? And so I think that we cook more with like the ingredients that are in front of us, rather than deciding what we're going to make and then going to purchase it. So that's why I wanted to organize the book in that way. The show came about because I wanted to make a documentary about the dying food traditions of Eastern North Carolina. Things like hog killings or putting up corn or making collard kraut. And
let's stop right there, because collard kraut I had never heard of, and I read it in here how you actually had a neighbor or someone, and the men actually did it. Let's share that story.
Yeah, so Ben's my husband. We had been living here for about 3 years and had the restaurant. and maybe, no, we had been here more like 4 or 5 years. And I was cooking, revamped versions of Eastern North Carolina food and kind of thought I knew everything there was to know about the region's cuisine. And I woke up one morning and there was this bag of dark brownish green leaves floating in kind of a milky liquid. And my dog wouldn't even get near it. And so I called my dad and I said, Dad, there's this strange stuff on my doorstep. I explained it to him and he said, that's a gift, it's collard kraut, and I believe it's from your neighbors. And so I was over the moon excited because at the time I was reading this book by Sandor Katz called The Art of Fermentation. And fermentation at the time was the hottest thing in every high-end kitchen in the United States. And to learn that my geezer neighbors were doing this collard kraut, this fermented pickle, and I was studying it at the same time was just blowing my mind. So I asked them if I could come and watch them make kraut, and they're like, sure, honey, next year when we do it. I'm like, can't you just do it now?
Saturday at 2?
Yeah, let's set this up. And they're like, oh, no. We can only make kraut when the Farmer's Almanac says the moon and the stars are not in the sign of the bowels, because then the kraut will rot. And I'm thinking, well, it's supposed to rot. That's what it is. And only men can make the kraut because women taint it. And we only use this special strain of collard that, we've saved the seed every year, and only well water, and on and on and on, all this folklore surrounding the making of collard kraut. And that experience really was what inspired A Chef's Life.
And it's such a wonderful show. Our viewers absolutely love it. So what are you working on? What's next?
Well, we're working on a new show, as well as I'm working on a new book.
Can you tell us a little bit about the new show?
Sure. Our working title is South by Somewhere, and it is in the same spirit and style of A Chef's Life in that the narrative will be told through my personal and professional journey. But instead of every episode being about an ingredient, every episode is about one of these dishes that every culture shares. So every culture has a dumpling, a quick bread, a catch-all stew, a way of cooking greens. And so we'll start with my culture, and then we'll learn about 2 to 3 other cultures. And instead of going to Korea to learn about, a Korean dumpling, we learn from a friend of mine who lives in the South, but is either first or second generation.
Oh, it sounds really interesting.
Yeah, and I think very relevant and also reflects what I'm interested in professionally.
Which is what?
Well, just, I've cooked Southern food for quite some time, and I'm really interested in learning about other cuisine and also sharing that experience of being a student in that way.
And what about the new book?
So the new book, the working title maybe is I'm Hungry. And
that sounds like a great title to me.
Yeah, and it's also Deep Run Roots, a narrative in that the stories will determine the tone and the spectrum of the book, if you will. And it's just about all the ways that I have been hungry. And some of it's about body image, some of it's about being driven, some of it's about not being able to feel full. And so
it goes in a lot of different directions. It gives people really a chance to think.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I loved about this book, because you took us inside your world by sharing the personal stories. A lot of times you'll pick up a cookbook and it may have a picture, it may not. It's going to be the ingredients, and then you're kind of left to your own to see how it's going to work. But you bringing the personal stories into the book, and I found even at 570 pages or 575 pages, it's a big book, but I went through it page by page, and I'm thinking, oh, so she's got her own set of Vivian's rules. And all of these stories from your childhood or where you're bringing forward, it was really engaging for a cookbook that I thought, what a beautiful take on it. And from being from Cleveland, I've got to admit, I've never had a turnip. I've never tasted a turnip. I know, isn't that hard to believe? But would you be willing to read something out of this book for us and share it?
Sure. Let's see. So I'll read the opening to the rice chapter.
All right, set it up for us.
So we talked about chicken and rice, my mom's kind of go-to meal. And this is about an experience of me making her chicken and rice. And it's a very personal story, but at the same time, I feel as if it's very universal, meaning that if you have a relationship with your mother, you will see some threads, some themes that you share with your mom in here. So my mom's lifelong bout with rheumatoid arthritis has included many difficult surgeries and experimental treatments. Through it all, Mom raised 4 girls, taught school, and bred Doberman pinschers for spending money. As you might imagine, meals were simple at my house. Mom didn't fry chicken, can pickles, or roll out biscuits. Instead, when Scarlett geared up to make a soul-warming meal for our family, it was almost always a pot of chicken and rice. This was our comfort food, the dish of my childhood, and probably the only thing my sisters and I all prepare for our children. As a chef and arrogant daughter, I felt I could improve on my mom's chicken and rice. I had watched her do it so many times, and each time I just knew she was cooking that chicken way too long. I believe the addition of a few aromatics like onion, garlic, and thyme would make what was already very tasty start to blow people's minds. So when my frail 70-year-old mom went under the knife for her second shoulder replacement, I decided to make her individual portions of chicken and rice for her recovery. Although never the nurturing kind, I was pregnant with twins at the time and was starting to look at all my relationships a little differently. For me, a big bowl of chicken and rice, glistening with fat and thick as porridge, was exactly what I craved when I was nursing a cold, a broken heart, or a hangover. Surely my gesture would nourish Mom in the same way. 2 days prior to her return from the Mayo Clinic, I made a rich roasted chicken stock using backs, necks, feet, garlic, bay leaves, and mirepoix. I chilled the stock overnight and scooped off the fat the following day. Then I covered the whole chickens with the gelatinous brown culinary wonder and brought it up to a simmer. I simmered the chickens for 10 minutes, turned the heat off, covered the pot, and let it sit for an hour. At this point, I was feeling like a genius and had started to daydream about improving the preparation of several other iconic Southern dishes. Generations to come would thank me. Next, really. Next, I removed the chickens and tasted the broth. It tastes like onions, garlic, and roasted bones. Well, I'll add some salt and black pepper. Black pepper was, after all, the one spice my mom used in excess. Oh, and maybe I should add some herbs, some thyme and rosemary, just to round out that oniony aroma. I always felt like Mom's chicken and rice would have been better if it were just a little more soupy. So I forewent her measurement of 1 part rice to 3 parts broth and poured in 1 cup rice for every 4 cups of liquid. I covered the pot, turned on the heat, and went about picking the chicken from the carcass. These were some perfectly poached chickens. The juice and fat running between my fingers pleased me, patted me on the back even. I was going to make her proud. In 15 minutes, I removed the lid and stared into what looked like dark stock with some rice floating in it. It was definitely too soupy, so I decided to just let it go a little longer. I'm not sure what I thought this would do, and actually I knew it was a bad idea, but all of a sudden I felt desperate and had forgotten how to cook. 5 minutes later, my rice had burst, broken its shape, the cardinal sin of rice cooking, and it was still floating in cups of broth. This was not at all what I had intended. In minutes, I would have a nasty country congee Scarlett would most definitely not eat. Okay, so I'll add all the chicken really fast with the heat off, cool down the broth, and stop the rice from bursting any further. I can save it. I most certainly could not save it. I did add all the chicken back to the pot, seasoned the hell out of the mess, and got the flavor to at least an acceptable place for my misguided palate. After chilling it down, I vacuum sealed 20 small portions for my mom, drove them over to her house, and nestled them in her freezer. When Mom got home, she was scary thin, weak, and a little bit crazy acting. I was 7 months pregnant with 2 babies, scary big, and also crazy acting. I told Mom I had made chicken and rice for her to have through her recovery, and she rolled her eyes. I did my best to overlook the reaction and carried on. A week later, I walked over to my mom's to check on her reserves and found that only 1 bag was missing. Mom, don't forget about that chicken and rice in the freezer. You have a lot of it. I called from her stock freezer to where she lay on the sofa covered in blankets. Ugh, it's not good. You can't make it. Take it with you. I don't want it. Mom complained with a grimace, eyes still closed. Okay, so I knew my chicken and rice didn't top the charts, but my mom was actually pissed off about the heartfelt gesture I had made. Enough was enough. If she wouldn't receive my gift graciously, then yeah, I'd take it back. I reached in the freezer, inverted my maternity shirt to reveal my stretched to the limit belly, and shoveled the remaining 19 packets into my top. I waddled across the yard to my house, flung frozen packets of chicken and rice all over the living room, threw myself onto the sofa, and cried. Perhaps I overreacted. I was hurt that my mom didn't just eat my chicken and rice and say thank you. I'm guessing she was hurt that I had felt I could make it better. Once my mom recovered and I'd had my babies, I asked to watch her make chicken and rice her way and took an honest interest in the food of my mother's kitchen. I learned that simplicity is very hard to pull off, and there are some recipes you just don't mess with.
That's true. Some recipes, you just don't mess with them. And I guess you don't mess with your mama either, right?
No,
When
you
she was
don't.
deciding what she was going to do. Gosh, this has been just amazing time, and it's already flown by so quickly. We're at the end of our time. So I want to thank you so much, Vivian, for sharing your kitchen office.
Yeah.
Tidbits about the show, A Chef's Life, which is so popular on PBS, and your book, Deep Run Roots. You are off and flying. And new show, new things happening. We just wish you all the best. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And it's been our pleasure. And I would like to thank all of you for joining us at Right Around the Corner, because it's been about Vivian Howard. We're in Kinston, North Carolina. Make sure you tune into A Chef's Life, and make sure to grab Vivian's 575-page book, Deep Run Roots. I'll see you next time, Right Around the Corner.